Good morning, everyone. Welcome to installment 2 of Welcoming the Stranger. So just some housekeeping announcements for the future to start with. My name is Alan Bath. I'm on the Adult Ed Council. And the next class will start January 8th. So we're taking 2 weeks off, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, no classes. All right. And that class will be in January 8th, Enneagrams. Bill Reed is the person that's going to be leading that session. He's a certified Enneagram person and is going to connect Enneagrams with spirituality, right? How does it mean to use Enneagrams in our spiritual life? So that's what's upcoming. This session is a 3 session. The previous session was a great session. We had Nanette tell us the underpinnings. Why should we, as Presbyterians, be welcoming strangers from other faiths? And today's session, we have Refugee 1-2 speakers, Zachary and Pastor Ken. They're going to give us an overview of the refugee experience. Yes, they're going to talk about the refugee issues in the United States, then Chicago. The next session, next week, we get much more into Forth's experience with refugees. So that's kind of our plan. I'll give a quick prayer and then we'll get started. Heavenly and dear Father, we would just ask that you would imprint upon our minds that which you would have us take away from this session. Help us to learn what you would have us do and learn about refugees, welcoming the stranger. How might we have open arms to people of other faiths and other cultures? In this we pray in Jesus' name, amen. So, Zachary, welcome.
Thank you so much, Alan. Hello, everyone. I have to say it is an absolute pleasure to be invited here today alongside Pastor Ken. Thank you for also coming. My name is Zachary Dmaterko. I'm the communications manager at Refugee One, and I was invited to give a little presentation about the work we do. Refugee One is the largest refugee resettlement agency here in Chicago. And before I jump into that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and I'll let Pastor Ken tell a little bit about himself. I only recently started working for Refugee One, so I'm quite new, but there's been a lot of changes at the organization, as you'll hear in today's presentation. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I come from a Ukrainian American family. I am Ukrainian American with the diaspora community here. Growing up, it was very interesting because I lived kind of 2 lives. So I know a bit about what the immigrant community in Chicago goes through. And my grandparents were also refugees to the United States. I went to college up in Milwaukee, and then I ended up volunteering quite a bit in Ukraine over a couple of years. This resulted in a Fulbright scholarship. Afterwards, I worked in US Congress at an international exchange agency, and then ended up working here at Refugee One now. So this is where I am. This is where I'm very happy to be, and it has been such a pleasure to work alongside refugees. Would you like to say a few words about yourself? Yeah.
Zach is the new guy. I'm the old guy. I've worked with Refugee One for its whole life. It's into its 40th year of operation here in Chicago, but I actually worked with the predecessor of Refugee One, which was the Illinois Consulate Churches. And then they moved to Chicago, and they joined with Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services and Episcopal Migration Ministries. And I served on the board for a number of years until finally they decided maybe they needed some new blood. And so I stepped back and have been doing a lot of volunteer work with Refugee One and some advocacy with congregations such as yours and the congregations that I have served. Well, when I graduated from college 100 years ago, I went to Tanzania as the Lutheran sort of equivalent of the Peace Corps, and worked with refugees that were coming into Tanzania from Mozambique at that time, and Rwanda and Burundi. And I really was changed as a result of my interaction with refugees. It kind of gets in your blood, and you know the needs of people around the world, and when you have opportunities to tell the story, it's a story that's hard to keep to yourself. And I think that's what Zach is about. He is one who is about telling the story. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your Ukrainian experience, because as I understand it, you came back to Chicago shortly before the war in Ukraine.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much, Pastor Ken. So I did, when I was working in DC for this international exchange agency, the war broke out in Ukraine, and I had a lot of family there. I had a lot of friends. I'd lived there for 2 years and volunteered, and I felt very called to go and to do something. At the time, I was kind of moonlighting as a journalist, so I thought maybe they'll be able to place me over there. That didn't quite pan out, but I said, I'm going anyway. And when I went, I brought with me a large amount of donations of medical supplies that our family had raised locally. This was all before Refugee One. This was right in March. And during my time over there, I saw the entire situation. You know, there was air raids daily on the city I was in, visiting my family. You know, there was a lot of hardship of war. I mean, of real modern war. And what I also saw that really moved me was the resilience of people, the ingenuity, and this will, this human spirit, where I've been to Ukraine before. It has its problems, just like any country. Neighbors fight with neighbors, but never have I seen such a unified group of people who, regardless of race, creed, ethnicity, language, which used to be such a divider, they were all really brought together. And this moved me. I got to see the refugees as they were leaving the country. I left in a line with them, and it was heartbreaking because a lot of these families get split up. And this is the experience. This is, you know, refugees are people every day like you and me. And we'll talk about this a bit in the presentation, but who extraordinary circumstances have befallen on them. And now they're no longer living where they wish to. Now they live where they have to. So
today in the gospel lesson, Pastor Kushner read from the gospel according to Matthew. And that was an interesting story and an interesting presentation that she made, interesting sermon. 3 weeks from now, on the first Sunday of Christmas, we will be reading from Matthew again, from the second chapter of Matthew. And you remember how the wise men come to the manger scene and make their presentations of the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they have a message that they are not to return to Jerusalem, to Herod, but to go back to their home country a different way. And Joseph and Mary know of the hostility that is facing them, and they flee into Egypt. You remember that story? Well, I served as a pastor of a congregation in Cairo in Egypt a number of years ago. That is a very, very powerful message for the Christian community and the Muslim community as well in Egypt, that the Holy Family found refuge there. And one of the Church World Service posters that I have, you by the way, are members of the organization Church World Service. That's the way in which you support and encourage or an organization like Refugee One. In the name of refugees, and you see Mary and the baby and Joseph fleeing into Egypt to find refuge. And the Lutheran image is this one. Jesus was a refugee. Same thing. We're in this together. We're in this together as communities of Christ. Because we as a people have been called to show hospitality, there's nothing else we can do but reach out to those who have, whose lives have been interrupted and overturned and have no place to go. Now, it's a very, very small percentage of refugees who ever find themselves here in Chicago or in the United States. I think it's less than maybe a half a percentage of refugees that are actually allowed to resettle in a third country. And Zach, maybe that's what you need to tell us a little bit about in your presentation here.
Absolutely. So I will just jump right in about the work that Refugee One does in the area, about the general situation of refugees right now in the world, and we'll just jump right into it. But I wanted to take just a little moment to hear from you all, to kind of get you all involved and to think a bit about a time that maybe you've moved to a new place. We've both definitely moved to different places. We've had to live in some interesting situations. And the questions I always like to think of, why did I have to move? Or why did you all have to move? What did it feel like to be new? And who were your first friends? Maybe some of us had to move due to a job or maybe a spouse. Maybe you had ailing parents and you wanted to be closer to take care of them. Maybe you just liked Florida, for example, and wanted some warmer weather other than Chicago. If anyone feels so inclined to share their story, I'd love to hear it. If not, I'm happy to tell a little bit about my own. Oh, please, Alan. Your first friends, exactly, yeah. And I don't know about you all, but my first friends when I moved to a new place, when I moved to Ukraine, was the people who came up to me, welcomed me with open arms, with an open heart, and said, hey, we see you're new here. Come join us. Let me show you all about my country and my culture. That is a portion of the work that Refugee One does here. Yes, sir, please.
I think I went to 5 different, the new kid 5 times in elementary school. And there's definitely a difference in communities. We were talking about Western PA, Pittsburgh area is a very welcoming area. From there, I moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which very cold. It took me a long time to break in. I mean, just a lot of different people. It's very scary to be the new kid.
Exactly. It is. And you never know. Sometimes people are really welcoming. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's very hard. And that's just a bit of the work we try to do. I think you've all heard maybe a bit about the co-sponsorship we are doing currently with Fourth Presbyterian. A couple, or a family, I should say, from Ivory Coast and Cameroon. They had the warmest welcome here to this city, to this cold city. I don't know if it was as cold as Wisconsin, but to this cold city. And in that, they were greeted very, very warmly by people just like you. By Refugee One, maybe set up everything else, but it was people like you that set up the apartment and took them to their first, subway, or sorry, my bad, bus transit, like showing them the ropes of like, how do you go to a grocery store here? Things like that we maybe even take for granted. I know when I moved, I was too afraid to go anywhere other than like the local babushka in Ukraine who was selling like snacks on the side of the road. Anyway, jumping into what Refugee One is all about. Our mission is to create opportunity for refugees fleeing war, terror, and persecution to build new lives of safety, dignity, and self-reliance. That's the core of our mission right there. Safety, dignity, self-reliance. All of our programs are aimed for this. And we're actually, we'll get into some statistics later on, but we're quite quite good at this. We have about 95% of the families we help resettle are self-sufficient within a year. Please. Yes.
If you look at that picture that is being shown, it's a Syrian woman that our congregations in Riverside and in Mount Prospect joined together in co-sponsoring. And the little baby was cerebral palsy and had very special medical needs. And we were able to access medical assistance here in Chicago. I think that's one of the things that is unique about the resettlement program here in Chicago is we have a lot of resources available. Medical, now Refugee One has set up a dental clinic.
Yes.
We have schools that are multicultural and multilingual. And that helps tremendously with the education of young children coming into the school system, to have someone who has a knowledge of their language.
Exactly.
So anyway,
Yeah. And we're very happy about that. We have a staff that speaks, I think the number's gone up, but last time we checked, about over 30 languages. So everything from Rohingya to Ukrainian to Afghan. It is just a very diverse place. And as you've heard, our mission is really welcoming the stranger. So I want to start by looking at, why do people leave their home? We in this field of work tend to break it down into two different categories. They choose to. That's the first category. That's people who are moving maybe for a better life economically, for a better education, even maybe situations where they're trying to reunite with their family or reason along that side. We tend to not, we just generally don't work with this population. We work with the people who are forced to move. That's refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people. These are people who, not by a choice of their own, but rather usually by war, persecution, terror, natural disaster, things like that, have been forced to leave their homes. So these are not necessarily people who would have wanted to. Globally, these forcibly displaced persons, and this is the statistics from the end of 2021, is 89.3 million. That includes refugees, asylees, internally displaced. I believe internally displaced is almost always the highest number. These are people who never even left their own country, but chose to remain within the boundaries of their country. If you look at this chart right over here, you'll see that in the last decade, it has been a very steady increase. And this does not even include numbers from the current war in Ukraine right now, which we'll get into the big picture of that in a minute. Our resettlement, just to make a little bit of a kind of a footnote, our resettlement, our full resettlement services are for refugees, this very specific category. And we won't get too deep into the categories, but we do also help asylum seekers to a small degree, not as large as our refugee resettlement. And then there's other populations, which I'll mention. So where are these refugees coming from? A lot of us maybe think that they can be from these specific countries, like, oh, this developing country that maybe has some problems in one way or another, or there's violence. The reality of it is a refugee can be anyone, anywhere, at any time. And there is such a thing as wealthy refugees. In my work over in Ukraine, I saw them. And we've helped refugees who had lives that were really fulfilling prior to their forced displacement. One story is that of Olha and Arseny Moroz and their husband, Olha's husband, Serhiy. They were all Ukrainians living near Kyiv, near the capital. The husband was a successful surgeon. The mom owned a fashion company, like a clothing design company. And the son was a European dance champion. I mean, what a great situation. That completely changed overnight. As soon as the war started, they had to endure bombings of their neighborhood. They lost neighbors, friends, family, and ultimately they decided this is not where they can live anymore. This is not a place that's safe. And so they came to the United States. Refugee One helped them. They welcomed them, helped them to get benefits, and all sorts of various assistance, which we'll talk about later. But ultimately, they had to leave everything they knew behind and rebuild their life anew. So it can be anyone, anywhere, anytime. But let's talk about some of these very specific situations going on. I, of course, will start with the Ukraine situation, as that's the most recent. Right now, we're looking at about 7.5 million Ukrainian refugees recorded it in Europe alone. That's where the majority of Ukrainian refugees have gone to. A lot of neighboring countries such as Poland, Moldova, Romania have taken them in, a small amount to Russia even. About 100,000 Ukrainians have sought refuge in the US since the invasion. And the two major cities for that is, and I'll hold questions. We do have a break and I'll take questions then, but about the most go to New York. That's the #1 largest city. Second largest city is here in Chicago. And to help resettle this large amount of Ukrainians, the Biden administration launched Uniting for Ukraine in April, which essentially creates a streamlined pathway for them to come here through a sponsor, through a financial sponsor, separate from the refugee admissions process. Also, in a very short time, we saw a large amount of Afghans come to the United States, a very large amount. And this was a very difficult time. This was a hard time. This was a population we'd worked in with small numbers prior. We saw in the US about 100,000 Afghans evacuated, similar numbers to the amount of Ukrainians. And this was by August 31st, 2021. They were distributed through various military bases. If you may all remember, the airports in Kabul were being loaded up with people and they were just trying to fly wherever they could. Chicago ended up one of the destinations for a lot of these refugees, and we ended up helping quite a large amount, about 500. And their situation is still precarious now because they're here under a temporary status. Much like Uniting for Ukraine, they have a temporary 2-year protected status. So what can refugees do? What is the opportunities for them? When they're displaced, taken from their homes? Well, maybe at some point down the line, they can return home. Not always a possibility. They can remain in another country of refuge. So we did have Afghans who now even work for Refugee One, who spent many years in a second country, in Turkey, for example, waiting to be resettled. And that's that third category. So some of those people just integrate and they just stay there for the rest of their lives. The third category, which Pastor Ken mentioned, was only about 1% actually get resettled by the UN to other countries such as the United States. And this is the smallest category, but this is the category that Refugee One deals with the most. Just a couple of fast facts that I'm going to list off right now. It takes about 17 years, an average of 17 years for refugees to be resettled. So from the time they're displaced, begin their applications through the UN, to the time they land here, it can be an average of 17 years. Most people, yeah.
In there, we have recently resettled a family from Sudan, a Christian family from Sudan, and they were in Cairo for 18 years. They have a 21-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old daughter, 17 and 14-year-old daughters. And I mean, they're Sudanese, but these girls, have never been to Sudan. I mean, the oldest one was born in Sudan. But so they have been in limbo for all of that period of time. The husband and wife were well educated in Sudan, but they really struggled with minimal jobs off the market, jobs existing for 18 years and holding their family together. And they've done a wonderful job because they're survivors. They are survivors.
They really are. So many of the people we work with are really very smart, very, ingenious in a way, very persistent. Because you have to be. Most of the refugees we are currently helping started their process about 4 to 25 years ago. Mustafa, one of my coworkers who I kind of mentioned earlier, he waited for 4 years in Turkey before he was resettled. For a lot of people, I mean, if you're looking at 25 years, that's a lifetime for some. That's a quarter of a lifetime. So the screening process also takes about 24 to 36 months minimum. It is the most thorough, most intense screening process for anybody entering the United States. And that's a portion of the reason it takes so long. So I could take a moment right here for questions. I know you had one over there, and I can pass it off to you, Pastor K, if you want to add anything else also. That is just government bureaucracy as far as I understand. Right now, it's really interesting because we also have an issue where the Trump administration gutted a lot of the infrastructure for refugee resettlement. And even though Biden raised the ceiling to about 100,000, the government apparatus to screen and process all those people just is not in place. It just takes a while to gear up. And so we're seeing a lot less people right now than we did, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So, yes, please.
Okay, hello, yeah. So you said 103,000 Ukrainians have been relocated to the US since the Russian invasion. Is that the recent one or the one that happened in Eastern Ukraine several years ago?
So that's through the Uniting for Ukraine program. So that's the most recent. So 2014, when Crimea and Luhansk and all those areas were invaded, most of those people ended up as internally displaced persons. A lot of them were dispersed throughout Ukraine. Only now have we seen these huge numbers. So that 103,000, I believe, was just recently, within less than a year now.
Has Refugee One done anything to lobby the government to try to streamline the work permit process so that the refugees who have talent and professions are able to work in this country?
We do have advocacy. We do have an advocacy person who's in charge of that. And a lot of what our advocacy recently has been in terms of speaking with government officials and pushing for legislation has been around the Afghan Adjustment Act. As I mentioned, Afghan evacuees, refugees, whatever label you'd like to give them who came here, they can only stay here for a maximum of 2 years under that status. What happens to them after?
We are fortunate here in Illinois that we have 2 senators who are generally advocates of refugees and displaced people. We have some legislative members who, if you have any contact with, if you're able to put in a good word on a particular bill, Refugee One certainly is able to provide the contact information, the points that would be helpful in convincing a legislator to vote in a certain way. So,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Are you finding that your refugees that have been waiting for these extended periods are finding their way into Mexico and using the open door at the south border? I mean, in other words, are you being put out of business by the current situation?
We are not being put out of business by the current situation. There's small numbers that come through the southern border, but it is not a majority. We have not seen a significant shift in that direction.
"60 years ago, I was an admissions officer at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, It was during the time of the parolees coming from Cuba. And one of my jobs was to work with those who did have educational credentials so that they could get retooled to re-enter the teaching profession. I remember the accountants were very much against this because of the competition that would derive from so many people becoming qualified to be CPAs. Are you all working with professional associations, legal, medical, educational, to help overcome that barrier? Or are there so many preliminary barriers to just being recognized that you cannot go to professional trade associations to help in the reestablishment of their credentials? Am I being clear?
Yes, yes. In general, so Refugee One has a lot of local partners. We do partner with various employers in the area. In terms of job training, it sounds like, in ensuring that they receive a similar access to opportunity as they would have with their education. It's a difficult situation. A lot of refugees who come here do not have the opportunity to go into jobs that maybe they have a licensing or a professional skill for. A lot of that is due to language barriers. A lot of that's due to employers seeking different credentials.
Let me just tell you a little bit about another family that we resettled recently. This was a combination of the Riverside Presbyterian Church and Ascension Lutheran in Riverside. And then we put together, Refugee One helped us put together kind of a GoFundMe page. And it got the message out into the community that these two congregations were interested in resettling a refugee family. Well, the money came in. You'd be surprised at how often people respond to these GoFundMe pages. So anyway, that's a whole nother story.
Oh.
But the family that we resettled was a husband and wife who had been living in Jordan for I think about 6 years. And when they were back in Syria, he owned a pizza shop place. And he is a fantastic baker of pizzas. Some sweet pizzas, I mean, he's invited us to the home, and we've had food, and he's a fantastic cook. But anyway, we found him a first job because his language skills were not adequate. He did some ESL at Refugee One, but then he really wanted to get to work. The first job was as an assistant in a car wash. Well, it was not where he wanted to be, but it was a check. He was able to bring food on the table for his family. And so he lasted there for several weeks. And then we found him a job as a sort of a short order cook at a Lebanese restaurant up on Dempster. And he loves it. And you've been eating food at Refugee One. Refugee One has been ordering stuff from Lebanese, the restaurant up on Dempster. Go there sometime. It's a really good restaurant and bakery. And I asked for Adnan. He is now happily employed as a cook there at the Lebanese restaurant. And thanks to Refugee One and the employment staff, that opportunity was made available. But you may, in this congregation, have contacts of people who would be willing and are looking for good employees. Refugees have proved to be excellent workers. And for example, one of the businesses that employs a lot of refugees is Eli's cheesecake. You probably have, most of those cheesecakes are put together by refugees who come through Refugee One.
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
this is mine.
It's actually very interesting you mentioned Eli's Cheesecake because a refugee we resettled, oh gosh, decades ago, is now one of the senior management at Eli's Cheesecake, dealing with millions, if not billions at this point, of dollars of requisitions and product. It's amazing. So he is now part of senior management. There are these great stories, as you've heard.
I was just going to say, time is ticking. So I'd love to move to the segment where we talk about, as Christians, how do we welcome those people that have different faith journeys than we do? So.
Okay. Well, I think you realize that Christians are just a small, well, a significant but fairly small percentage of the world's population. And we as a Christian community don't welcome people in order to proselytize, in order to bring them into our community. We, if that happens, fine, great, we would welcome them. But that should not be our primary reason for extending a welcome. The families that I've had experience with recently are Buddhist and Muslim and Christian. The Adnan, this man that I just mentioned, is Muslim. He is fairly observant Muslim. We had to be very careful. His wife did not want to be pictured, so we'd have to ask in order to if it was appropriate to take her picture. Or she may wear a headscarf, which is very appropriate and very attractive. And they come with their cultures and their religious beliefs, and we can learn from them. In fact, Adnan and I have a number of Muslim friends, and during Ramadan, I'm generally invited to an iftar, an interfaith iftar. And he and I went to the Turkish center up in Mount Prospect. You know the place? Yeah. It's a wonderful school and a wonderful Turkish ethnic mosque there. And and Adnan was just so happy that he was able to break fast with fellow Muslims. And I was so happy that he was able to have that experience. Most of the refugees that come find a place where they feel welcome. So it may be the Syrian Association of Chicago, or it may be one of the Buddhist temples in the Chicago area. That's another thing that we're fortunate in, that we have a religiously diverse population. And so I guess what I'm hoping is that when you resettle a family, you are aware of their religious traditions and don't try to make them something that they are not. They're at a very vulnerable point, and they may come to a worship service once in a while, but let them go. You know, let them find, and what we do as a Christian community is give them a place of hospitality to get started. And I just got an email from our our group in Riverside. And one of the members of our committee was a little bit frustrated that, that the family seems to be pulling away from us. And she was a little frustrated with that. I'm rejoicing in the fact that they're pulling away. That means that they are actually resettling. They're adjusting. So welcome people, but then let them go. And I would hope that that if you resettle a Muslim family, that you do some research, find out where their particular ethnic group may feel most comfortable in a religious setting. And if you are uncomfortable finding that, Refugee One can be of help in finding that that location or that place of worship. Yeah.
I want to give a little testimonial about Refugee One, and then I have a question. I raised my son here in Chicago at this church, and he went to a private Catholic school in Chicago. And in the second grade, he was introduced to a young man who became his best friend, who was a refugee from Bosnia. And their family used Refugee One. And I don't know, I haven't followed his parents, but we follow Jameer on Facebook, and he now, you know, he got a great scholarship to Latin school for high school after his grade school, a great college scholarship. He owns a chiropractic business in Northbrook, a wife and 2 kids, and OMG, that's wonderful, right? And that was 30 years ago. And then there's, I lived in we had a refugee family a couple years ago that we sponsored here from Fourth. And I was getting some things together, and I put them down on the first floor in my building, and the superintendent inquired who those things were going to. Well, I explained to him somebody from Refugee One was going to pick them up. He went into his wallet and he pulled out a card from Refugee One that he had carried for almost 40 years. Wow. Very powerful stories. But so thank you for that kind of stuff. And, you know, when people integrate like that, we don't hear the good, we don't look 20 years down the road as churches. But my concern now is that it's my understanding that the majority of these kinds of refugees are sponsored by groups, and most of those groups are religious institutions. And there are fewer religious institutions in this country, and younger generations aren't going into that. So I'm just curious how Refugee One is adjusting to that, because I think there will be an adjustment needed.
It's interesting. Yeah. I know currently from our co-sponsors, we do have a lot of faith-based groups. A lot of congregations of all faiths. In fact, one of our most recent co-sponsorships that's going phenomenally, if you saw the Chicago Tribune on Thanksgiving Day, front page was a story of a refugee family, the Hussein family, or the Dil Mohammed family, who are Rohingya, and they're Muslim refugees from Burma. Their co-sponsor was Jessica Littman, the Littman family, and a Friends-based group, but she herself was Jewish. And there is this amazing interfaith story. And it was interesting. We did an interview. I talked with Johar, who is the father. And he said, they believe what they believe. We believe what we believe. Ultimately, we're all just humans. And it was so powerful. It's so beautiful. And the interesting thing is, that wasn't a faith-based group. This was a group of friends and family. So there are groups out there who aren't faith-based, but it's still an important part of understanding this interfaith connection. Yes, please.
So I, thank you very much. So while there's horrible things happening and terrible atrocities to all these people, and on the other hand, I kind of have this thing inside me that this could be a way that our higher power introduces us I could almost cry on this, to each other. It's the lesson we must learn, is to let everybody be free with whatever religion they are. And I'm just going to share this. I particularly love Muslims. I mean, I love everybody, but after 9/11, the next day, I found the Downtown Islamic Center and I went there, and I cannot tell you, I'm very good friends with them and other like Niagara and, you know, other, what they did is I got off the elevator. At that time they were on Wabash, now they're on State Street, and I go to all their Ramadan dinners. But on that day, I didn't know what I was going to say or what I was going to do. And I really feel like it was a higher power pool. I didn't know the answer to anything. And they just all looked at me. It was all men. And they said, would you like to come and sit in the conference room? All we have is chicken, Coke, and something else, rice. And I said, yes. And I started going to mosque every Friday at noon and found such a beauty in that religion. So I'm glad that you were in Egypt. I was there too, and awesome.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Just following up on what we can do together and how we can help each other from that standpoint. I've served a lot of congregations. Some people stay in one congregation for their whole ministry. I've moved around a lot. And in each of the congregations that I've been at, I've somehow gotten the congregation involved in refugee ministry. And it has really awakened the faith interest of a number of people who've been kind of sitting in the back pew or on the sidelines, who don't like to get involved in choir or don't like to get involved in a women's group or finance committee, but want to get involved in some sort of social ministry. And so that has opened up some doors for a lot of people. And over the last few years, I've made an effort of trying to get another congregation besides my own congregation involved in a project. And so kind of joining together in a dual co-sponsorship has worked out very well. In Riverside, for example, you know, we're a fairly small community on the western suburbs of Chicago. Presbyterians have a lovely church there. Lutherans have 2 lovely churches there. And there are a number of other denominations. We've joined together the team, the refugee team of the Presbyterian Church and the Lutheran Church, and opened it up to anybody who wants to be involved. And we've gotten to know each other. You know, we've gotten to know the congregations a lot better. They come to our taco dinner, we go to their Christmas exchange and interact, and it has opened up a whole new avenue of conversation because we're doing something together that's important. And so not only is it helpful to the refugee family that is being resettled, I think it's helpful to the congregations. It's really good to know that those Presbyterians down the street are actually involved in ministry.
That's easier.
Thank you. That provides a really nice segue to an invitation to everybody who's here and to get the word out to people you know about next week's class, because what we're going to be doing next week is talking about Fourth Presbyterian's experience with refugee families through Refugee One. Polly's going to speak. I think some others who have been very closely involved with the families over the last, 6 years, 7 years, Polly? 6 years. We'll speak on our experiences with that. And to your point, there are things you discover when you embark on this journey, whether it's, you know, what they'll speak about, or the proliferation of donations that we got this year when, you know, groups just that we never would have heard stepped forward and said, we'll furnish the place, we'll do this. It's been remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take just a moment. There was a bit more content, but ultimately it sounds like you all know a bit about the programs that we do. We provide a wide range of services. You heard English speaking classes. We do help with work authorization, employment. We have an entire employment team. We have wellness services. A lot of refugees come here with some very heavy mental baggage, mental, trauma. And we provide wellness services. We provide these English classes, as mentioned. We provide everything needed for self-sufficiency. We provide apartments and a 6 months rent, all the way up to citizenship services. If you feel maybe after today that this could be your way of welcoming the stranger, we at Refugee One have a lot of different opportunities. You all look 17 or older, so you're welcome to volunteer in any of the capacities. We do have a mentorship program for both adults and for children. This mentorship program is essentially kind of teaching and more like being a colleague alongside a refugee family in getting to know the United States in a more one-on-one way than a co-sponsorship. But we also have tutoring opportunities if you feel called to that. We do, of course, also have the co-sponsorship, which you all will learn about in the next session, it sounds like, about the co-sponsorship that's going on currently. And then there's also other ways to help, such as donating. If you feel called to any of these, I highly encourage you. Get involved, check out our website, refugeeone.org. There is a wide variety of ways to get involved, and maybe one of them will stick out to you. So actually, we're currently, let me hop back here. We are currently located in West Rogers Park. So we're in the north side right now in a new headquarters. It's a 3-story building right on the corner of California and Peterson, very close to the populations we serve. That's why we chose this location, very close to Devon Avenue. All of our programs are finally under one roof. No longer do we have our youth program in a totally different neighborhood. And if you're interested, this is 6008 North California Avenue. You can check our website for that address. It is a beautiful place. If you're interested in a tour, we are going to be kind of opening up towards tours in the coming months. Check in the new year. Send me an email if you'd like. Be happy to show you around. And that's my email right there. And then we do have some satellite offices that have recently opened up to help with the Ukrainian population, as we're serving about 2,000 Ukrainians right now, which is immense. Afghans was about 500. Other refugees is a similar number, about, yes, 2,000 Ukrainians. Yeah.
I think we're probably going to have to draw this to a close, but I would ask that you join with me in this closing litany. And your response is, grant us grace, O Lord. Grant us grace, O Lord. Let's try it. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who seek refuge, that they might find safety and home. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who are detained, that they might find freedom and justice. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who have endured torture, that they might find healing and peace. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who perpetrate injustice, that they might learn truth and righteousness. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who set policy, that they might have wisdom and courage. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who serve, that they might have compassion and strength. Grant us grace, O Lord, to those who pray, that we may have your generous answer. Amen. Go in peace and serve the Lord.